So I'm going to be 100 miles away from my Russian adversary. He's not even going to know I'm there. And there's a missile in the sky heading his way. It's not glamorous. It's not Top Gun. It's not warrior against warrior. It's technology, and it's very effective. And that is where the West has a huge advantage. The disadvantage is, as we've been talking about, the West doesn't have the appetite for casualties that Russia does. So Russia would want to draw you into a war on the battlefield. The West would want to use its technology to stop Russia in its tracks.
And if we compare F-35 jets, F-22 jets with Russia's Su-35 and the new models, what are the chances of Western aircraft against Russian in the sky?
Yeah, and I would follow the same path, is that the Russians have had a lot of problems developing their next generation platforms, and many of them have been delayed. What we see is some very good, a good look to the aeroplane, and it looks very agile, and it's a little bit stealthy. But the one thing that Russian aircraft have never been famous for is their technology. So a military fighter jet, the F-35 isn't that stealthy, but it's got an electronically scanned radar, which is very effective. The way it brings the information together so that the pilot can understand, not only from its sensors, but sensors from other platforms around. How you bring all of that together, because it's one pilot in the cockpit with an immense amount of details around him. That is where, so it's radars, it's electronic warfare, it's defensive countermeasures, all of those capabilities you can't see, but that's where the real combat teeth of an aircraft are. And that is an area which Russia has never been very good at. I've spent some time flying in an Mi-8 helicopter, for example, and the Mi-24s. And the one thing that's amusing is that they don't have any technology in them, but they're very rugged. They never break. So if you're going to be using them on a battlefield, we're very fragile because all of our aircraft are carbon fiber. It's not easy to repair them. Russian aircraft are just built really solidly. They're very reliable, but they don't have any technology, really. So that is the area where the West still has a massive advantage over Russia.
Do you consider Russia as a paper tiger in terms of equipment, capabilities, air power, ground forces also? Because Russia has lost 1.3 million soldiers only in Ukraine, only in this war against Ukraine, not against NATO allies.
Yeah, I mean, the danger is that you take one element of their capability and you can be dismissive about it. The one huge strength that Russia has is combat experience. If you remember with Blitzkrieg in the Second World War, the Germans had combat experience. French forces didn't, British forces didn't, and the Germans just swept through. Russia and Ukraine, but Russia has a lot of combat experience now. On the offense, they've changed their tactics a lot, and I wouldn't underestimate that. The other thing that Russia's got is that soldiers win battles, but nations win wars. And what I mean by that is you need to get your defense industrial base spun up, because war is a whole of society enterprise. It's not just about the soldiers on the battlefield. You've got to get them the bullets. You've got to get them the guns. You've got to get them the missiles. You've got to replace the tanks. You've got to replace their body armor. That is a whole of society enterprise. And Russia has its economy on a war footing. It is generating the bullets, the guns, the missiles that it needs to win the war. The West hasn't done that yet. They've been talking about doing it for several years, but they've not done that yet. So there are a couple of areas where purely in terms of generating quantity and also with battlefield experience that Russia is dangerous. So I wouldn't call them a paper tiger, but there are distinct advantages the West has, and it would be absolute folly for President Putin to have a go at NATO.
How close are we to the Third World War right now?
I don't think we're very close at all. First of all, I think Iran is nothing to do with the World War. I think I would characterize Iran as being a really interesting case study. So where it links to Ukraine, if Ukraine still had nuclear weapons, would Russia have invaded?
We don't think so, probably, in Ukraine.
I agree. But in 1994, America, the UK, Russia forced, persuaded, encouraged to sign the Budapest Memo and guarantee your security. 20 years later, Russia ignored it. Why is that important? It's important because the West has been quite effective at stopping the spread of nuclear weapons. They've been around since the end of the Second World War. Very few countries have them. Why is that? Because there has been a control mechanism to stop countries getting that technology. But if you look at Ukraine's example, these days, unless you're a major superpower, the only way to guarantee your sovereignty, the only way to guarantee that nobody will invade you, is if you have a nuclear weapon. So is it a great surprise that Iran wants to develop a nuclear weapon? Is it a great surprise that North Korea wants a nuclear weapon? And in fact, if you look around the world, 195 countries of the world, there's going to be a lot more of them that want nuclear weapons, because how do you guarantee your security otherwise? And I think that's one of the challenges that Russia, by invading Ukraine, and Iran's understandable desire to protect itself, but it's created a situation, particularly with Israel. We've not talked about Israel, but if Iran got a nuclear weapon, then that's an existential threat for Israel. And therefore, because America is the strategic guarantor of Israel, it had no choice but to say you can't have a nuclear weapon. You either talk about it, but if you talk about it and do nothing about it, we're going to stop you. And that's effectively what the war in Iran is about. So I don't think it's about nuclear war. Well, it can't be about nuclear war. Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. And it's not about world war at all. I don't think world wars suit anybody these days. But I think the rules have changed. How can America criticize Russia for invading Ukraine when it goes into Venezuela and plucks the leader? If it goes into Iran without asking any of its partners, without going to the United Nations, without reference to any international law, and goes and invades another country or bombs another country, how does China assess that? What does China think, therefore, about going into Taiwan, as you mentioned earlier? And what does that mean for global security? You know, we've respected, whether you're a bigger nation or a small nation, whether you're America or you're a little island of the 195 nations that are around, you've all still had basic rights. People respect your sovereignty, respect your independence. If you're not one of the major powers, it feels like, as the Canadian Prime Minister said, you're on the menu. And therefore, how do nations protect themselves? I think that leaves UK. We left the European Union. If NATO is less robust than it used to be, what is the alliance that provides us with that security? When the war is over in Ukraine, what is the alliance that's going to guarantee your security, but also that of your neighbours? There's some profound questions that arise now as a result of these conflicts.
From your perspective, can US use nuclear weapons against Iran? Trump has been talking about
no.
full devastation of Iran.
I'm pretty much very confident that America would never use nuclear weapons in Iran.
But they did it after the Second World War. Do you feel that they have?
How do you mean? You mean in Japan?
Yeah.
Right.
Don't you think that they have this? Yeah.
That's a complete. So again, we've got to be careful what lessons we draw from history. The Second World War, we'd seen 70 million people die. America had been drawn into the war. Japan was losing. The island hopping campaign meant that you knew how many soldiers you were going to lose, and the price for America to roll up Japan and force it to surrender was going to be a huge price in American lives. So the Japanese were given an ultimatum. They chose not to take it. First bomb went off. There's the ultimatum. They chose not to take it. Second bomb goes off. They signed. That was deliberately to go, we've saved hundreds of thousands of American lives. Japan, you know you're going to lose now, but the only way we can do that is cost of loads of American lives. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not trying to justify it, but there was a particular set of circumstances there, and it did secure peace, and it did save a lot of American lives. I don't think we're looking at the same in Iran at all. I don't think America has a beef with the Iranian people. I think it's about stopping them having a nuclear weapon. And yeah, I don't think you need nuclear weapons to take out any targets in Iran.
Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has been threatening using nuclear weapons in Ukraine for a while. That said, from your perspective, don't you feel that Vladimir Putin has opened a Pandora box by invading Ukraine? Because after 2022, Hamas attacked Israel, US-Israel war against Iran, Venezuela. What's your take on this?
Well, there's two questions there. One about nuclear weapons. The Pandora's box thing is an interesting one because some of these tensions, we see a peaceful world, but it's not peaceful. You know, the area of Kashmir is constantly being fought over. There's parts of the world where fighting continues to this day. Israel and the Palestinians, that has been a problem ever since the State of Israel was formed and has never been resolved. Every now and again it erupts, and on that fateful day on the 7th of October when Hamas attacked Israel, yes, I think Israel's ever since that has seen that as an opportunity to, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to try and sort the region out. I think going back to your question about nuclear weapons though, Putin threatening the use of nuclear weapons, I think is, I'm grey-haired as a veteran of the Cold War. Throughout the Cold War, we lived under the omnipresent threat of nuclear holocaust. But we talked about it a lot. And we recognise that nuclear weapons, however abhorrent, however horrible they are, they will never be used. Because if they are used, the whole construct of mutually assured destruction means that everybody dies. Nobody wins. So they are the ultimate deterrent against your enemy attacking you, and it has worked. For 80 years it's worked. The problem is that because we have had 35 years now of not being in the Cold War, our military, our politicians, our public are not used to the language, the rhetoric that goes around nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons it's called the deterrent for a reason. Your nation's enemies have to be deterred from, and to do that, your nation's enemies have to believe that you would use the weapon. So I've got to stand there looking you in the eye, and you've got to believe that I would press that button. And that's how it works. So Putin rattling the cage that says, I might use nuclear weapons, is all part of that same philosophy. And what he's got to be matched by is that same philosophy from the West that says, you don't want to do that, Putin, because if you do, you know that you will launch an Armageddon. We will never let you get away with that. And despite the talk, That's why nuclear weapons works, because they'll never be used. And the one time that, was it the Cuban Missile Crisis, when both sides were escalating, and all of a sudden there were some back channels opened up because they went, hang on a minute, neither of us actually want to go to nuclear war. It doesn't benefit either of us. How do we turn down the dials here? And that's exactly what happened. Putin is capitalizing on the fact that the West is not used to talking tough about nuclear weapons. We've got to learn to do that again.
Do you see this as Western weakness?
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe they're too concerned about their voters and polls and people, not to scare them. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, I think it is. I think there are lots of things about the Cold War which we've got to wake up to. Another example where we're weak is in the Cold War, we didn't have troops at readiness. We didn't have ships at readiness. We were ready because you didn't know when you were going to be attacked. So we would have surprise exercises launched by NATO. Within 2 hours, we had to be at our jets with our kit bags ready to go into the field. We had to be able to operate, and that's whenever it happened, you didn't get any warning. And we've lost that capability now. So we've had, for example, we've got 2 aircraft carriers, but we can't keep one of them available all the time. We have 4 nuclear submarines so that we can have a continuous at-sea deterrent. There's always one at sea. It takes 4 submarines to do that. In the Royal Air Force, we have Typhoon aircraft available on quick reaction alert 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whenever the warning goes up, there's a jet in the air. The aircraft carriers, they don't have enough to be available all the time. So they might be available, they might not be available. But that's about like having your fire brigade at home that's only available 2 or 3 days a week. You dial 999 and call for the fire brigade. Sorry, we're not available today. Well, that's no good, is it? And I think that's the transition that our military's got to get back to now. And that's a very different psychology. It's you're ready for war, not at readiness. Not in 2 or 3 months' time. Should it happen, we'll get ready for it. So there's lots of areas of this that we are not well prepared at the moment. That's not just about the equipment, it's how we use the equipment and the doctrine behind it.
And final question for you. Where is our world right now?
What do you mean by that?
I mean the global powers, conflicts, wars around the globe. And do you feel secured, safe today? Taking into account that we have lots of wars going on. Ukraine, US-Israel war against Iran and possible other confrontations.
That's a great question. I think there are some youngsters today who would feel very scared. I don't. I think we have, for the last 35 years since the Cold War ended, I think we've kidded ourselves that there's no more bad guys, that there'll be no more wars. And there's rules of law, international rules of law. And we've watched as some countries haven't followed those. And we've said, hang on a minute, that's not right. We'll bring their ambassador in and send them a stiff letter. And gradually the world has unraveled around us. The United Nations, which was designed to create an opportunity to stop wars, Russia, a permanent member, invades another country which is directly in contravention of what the United Nations is all about. How can it possibly remain in the United Nations? How can it possibly retain its place on the Security Council? My point is that a lot of these institutions, NATO, United Nations, International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, were invented at the end of the Second World War in an effort to stop another major war. But in the 80 years that's followed, things changed. And it feels like a lot of countries have abused those situations to capitalize for their own gain. And we have a saying in the UK, it feels like the emperor's new clothes, that we've kidded ourselves that, well, we're going to stick to the rule of law, why aren't you? Whereas this is a bit of a wake-up call that says, actually, things do change. There are some bad people in the world. We need to protect ourselves from that. We've lived for 35 years with the luxury of not having to spend much on defence. Those days are over. We need to prepare. And the best way to avoid war is to prepare for it. Because, as I found in the military, if you are standing on that wall, defending your nation, prepared to fight your nation's enemies, and if necessary, pay with your life for that, as long as you're professional and determined and credible, your nation's enemies won't take you on. We've got to return to that. And that transition will be painful because we haven't got the money. It'll mean other priorities have to change. But in a way, it gives me reassurance that actually we do need to get ourselves back, find our way. We left the European Union, we're an island nation, and now we feel very vulnerable. I think there's some positives to take away, but we've got to take action.